It is a brand new episode of Flyers Daily, a Monday edition. Flyers Daily, as always, brought to you by Ticketmaster. Make more memories live. We've got a lot to discuss as now we are in the portion of the offseason where we collect the question marks. And joining us to talk about that and much more from PhiladelphiaFlyers.com, NHL.com, and HockeyBuzz.com, it is a cleaned-up Bill Meltzer, along with a cleaned-up Jason Myrtetus. We look like the season's getting close, Bill, just 60 days away between now and that first game. So we started the process of power washing ourselves.
Exactly. Wrapping up for the season, power washing. I have a little setup going on here. unlike when I'm in Texas, where I'm basically sitting in front of a window.
We're starting to dial it in. We're not going to go through that the skate with the rope like the players do, but we'll do our own version of that. Bill, before we kind of get into the particulars of the top 10 question marks heading into the season, I do want to send out well wishes to Johan Gartner. He had posted on Twitter. He was even debating with himself whether to post about it, but he has been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And he said, while it's new and scary, I'm also determined to make it my bitch and kick its ass. I sent him a note. I just wanted to send along our well wishes from the Flyers and Flyers Daily to Johan to go into this eyes wide open. I'm glad that he posted it because I think the power of a lot of people supporting him will help. And in his battle against pancreatic cancer. So our thoughts and prayers are with Johan, and certainly hoping that he does kick its ass and make it his bitch.
Yeah, Johan, great guy, diehard Flyers fan, and just my own personal message, you got this, Johan. You'll do this.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys that flies the flag around the world.
Yeah.
And flies it with a lot of pride. And he's definitely in our thoughts. And, Johan, I can't wait to see your note that it's in your rearview mirror and you are going to beat this thing and kick its ass. So our thoughts are with you, and all Flyer fans' thoughts are with you as well. Bill, we're going to get into the top 10 question marks. We do this every offseason. I think this is now the fourth one where we've kind of collected these question marks going into the season. And it's my contention, Bill, going into any sports season, this goes back when I worked in sports radio as well, the more question marks and consequential question marks that you have going into a season usually kind of allows for a little bit of variability on what that team is going to be. The more you have of consequence, then the variance and how the team performs is out there. And there's 10 that I've come up with in this episode that I think are the most consequential, but there's even more than the 10. These are just the ones that I deemed as kind of the top 10.
No, for sure. I mean, listen, in year 3 of a rebuild, that's you figure it would be there. Because you're not at the point yet where you've really turned a corner. There have been some indicators, but there's a lot of question marks, and you can look up and down the lineup as to where those question marks are, and you're going to have to answer a lot of these in the affirmative as the season goes along to really make progress between this offseason and next offseason, which I think everybody agrees is the critical offseason as to really where your gauge is in the rebuild and what your timetable is then to come out on the other side.
Yeah, that's kind of where we'll wrap up with the 10 is, the marker point. Where is this marker point? I think there's a lot of disagreement just on when the rebuild even started. There's some disagreement whether it's even a rebuild or a retool. But the 10, I'll just kind of go through them briefly, and then we're going to attack 5 of them in this episode. These are really not in any particular order, but number 1 that I have was the goaltending tandem of Ersson and Fedotov. Number 2 is the early arrival of Matvei Michkov. Morgan Frost and the Crossroads that he and I think the organization are at congruently. Sean Couturier, year 2 now back after missing 21 months. The power play and the fact that it has not been so powerful. The defense core with York, Sanheim, Drysdale, Zamula, Sealer has been extended. Where does Risto fit in? Those questions. Team unity and belief, the character of the room. The messaging of the messenger is John Tortorella, now the oldest coach in the NHL. We'll discuss Torts' messaging and where the team goes in regards to the head coaching position beyond this year when his contract only has 1 remaining. Then the young core of Forster, Tippett, Cates, Farabee, York, Drysdale and others taking that next step, and like I said, the marker in the rebuild. But where we'll start here, Bill, to really get into the nitty-gritty of it, is between the pipes, because we know the consequence of goaltending. I always say the teams in the NHL, if you want to tank, if that's your kind of path forward, it doesn't necessarily take just decimating your roster. Just put a couple of goalies in net that can't stop a beach ball from the blue line, and you'll tank because of the consequence of the position. Now they have Sam Ersson coming in as the presumptive starter, and Ivan Fedotov, who's seen 3 appearances in NHL action, but a lot of question marks here. When it comes to goaltending, this may be the biggest question mark and most consequential question mark coming into the season.
Without a doubt. Going into last year, before everything went down with Carter Hart, you knew Hart was going to be the number 1 goalie up until all the legal stuff came down.
Well, I will tell you real quick, though, and I'll reveal this now. I had a conversation with Carter in training camp last year, and like always, we were geeking out about equipment. I said, you went all white with the pads. What kind of got you to do that? You always had a little splash of color. He said, I didn't know if I was going to be here. He heard the trade rumors.
Yeah. No, and I mean, it's going to be. I mean, but last year was always, is Ersson ready to be the number 2 goalie? How many starts will he get? Those kind of things. This year, I think what we've seen from Sam is he looks like an NHL goalie. He's had stretches where he's been quite good and somewhat prolonged stretches, but he's also had some pretty rough stretches too. I think he ended up being pulled a few many times for my liking, not through any fault of his own. I mean, rather not through any fault of the coaching staff, where most of his games you had to make a goalie change.
You could see it when he didn't have it. You could see it.
You could see it, and I mean that's sometimes the difference between a backup quality goalie and a true starter. And if it's going to be a 1A 1B, we still don't know what Fedotov really is. I toss out those couple games at the end of the season.
Me too.
I think that getting a run-up of a training camp, some preseason games, we'll have a better sense of how much he'll be able to contribute as you get into the season. I think that in order for the Flyers, at least the number 1 guy, to hold the fort and the team to be on an upswing from last year, I think you're going to have a save percentage of probably not above .910.
Yeah.
And, neither guy did that last year. Again, a very short sample size for Ivan, but I think you're going to need something in that range. And while Sam had stretches that were like that, some time for about 6 weeks long, Russell stretches where he was about 870, and that's not going to do it.
Yeah. Cumulatively, it ended up being 890 on the year.
Yeah.
Well below league average.
Below, and that's a backup kind of a thing, for I mean the Flyers this year. As we get into this, we'll talk about the need to score more goals, but they also can't have their goals against rise in right in tandem with it or worse, exceed it. So I really that to me is the making obviously the saves that you have to make, the routine ones, and stealing some games. You're gonna have to have that in the course of the season. Again, Fedotov still to me is an unknown quantity, and if you're gonna have a true number 1 this year, at least coming in, I think it has to be Sam. So whether it's a 1A 1B or a starter and a backup, I think you need more from both guys than we saw.
Yeah, I've kind of mentioned this on the pod. 2 things. One, that I'm not even really interested in the semantics of who's the starter and who's not at this point. I don't think either guy's earned the label. I think that earned process has to start this year. I'm not going to judge Ivan Fedotov on his first 10 appearances this year. When he gets about 28, 30 game, 25 to 28 games into his pro career, then I'll start to make judgments, because I think then we'll start to see trends. because goaltenders can be, like we saw Sam Harrison go 12-3-2 at one point with a .936 save percentage and 3 shutouts. He was lights out. And we've seen a lot of goalies over the decades that you and I have been observing this game go through that as well. Ultimately, what is the mean? What's the median numbers? And for Fedotov, it's interesting because he's not a young man. I mean, this is a guy that's 27 years old right now. He'll be 28 coming up in November in the early part of the season, so it's not developmental years for him. So I would just wonder, what is it like making that adjustment at 28 as opposed to making the North American adjustment 23 to 25 years old, which I think is far different.
For sure, and you can't even necessarily look to history as your guideline here.
Yeah.
Because it's really all over the map about goalies, particularly who came from Europe at a later age. I mean, the Roman Chikmanek, who was a Vezina finalist and an all-star his first year. The playoffs were, sometimes another story with Roman, but but you would say it was a success story. I mean, again, as a Vezina finalist his first year and took over the #1 job for the next 3, won the Bobby Clark Trophy, and then there are plenty of guys who came over and whatever success they had in Europe, they couldn't translate it over here. And then there were guys in the middle like Roman Turek, who was very inconsistent, sometimes on, sometimes off. So you can't really look at a history of goalies that came over in their mid to late 20s and say, okay, well, they tend to be good, they tend to not be good.
It's really all over the map.
Real over the map, depends on the player and depends on the team they're on and a bunch of other factors too.
Yeah, and I think, the thing about it too is it's a lot of it's situation and it's the ability just to prognosticate that particular position in general, whether the kid's from Saskatoon or he's from, Ohio. It doesn't matter, or he's from Belarus or whatever it might be. It's a big question mark coming into the season. Roman Turek, by the way, has one of the great contributions to goaltending of any guy out there. He did something that changed the game for goaltenders. And what he did was, they call it the Turek grip. He was the first guy to flip, and when Ron Hextall played pucks or Marty Brodeur, they played it with the open part of the palm. Roman Turek flipped that hand around so you could get more pressure on the stick and you could use the flex of the goalie stick. Initially did it just to have a firmer stick on rims behind the net. But then it became, boom, flip the glove around, and now you got more torque on the goaltending stick. So just a little tidbit of information. By the way, this goaltending conversation will come up again because when we get into part 2 of this conversation, one of the things we're going to talk about belief and the locker room. Getting off to a good start is a big element why belief set in last year and why they had good culture. Got to get off to a good start this year, and you're going to need goaltending to be a big part of that, no doubt about it. Bill, the second one I want to attack is an obvious one because it's been the most exciting element of this offseason and maybe the most exciting element since the Flyers headed into the bubble for sure, and maybe some people say since the addition of Eric Lindros as a member of the Flyers, and that's the dynamic talents and the early arrival of Matvei Michkov. This is a huge question mark going into the season because none of us expected him to come this early, but what is the impact of this player at 19 years of age? I'm not going to heap huge expectations on him from my perspective, but I will tell you that I've just been really impressed with the things that he's communicated through a translator. I'm not sure the exact words, and we're getting the translated version of it, but the things he wants to accomplish are all team related. Yeah. And I saw a picture yesterday on social media of him at a restaurant with his younger brother. And I always say you can tell a lot about a person by the way they, the way they portray themselves with their family. And boy, does he seem like a family kind of, really happy his brother's here. I think that's a really big element. His mom's here as well. But the question marks around Michkov are plenty, but the excitement does not lack at all here.
And I think that'll extend to his teammates too.
Yeah.
I think that
he's a spectacle.
Yeah. Exactly, and it's easy to get swept up in that. Certainly having his mom and his brother here, just in terms of him getting acclimated, feeling comfortable, all that's going to help. And in terms of the on the ice stuff, I mean, he's a very ambitious player, and yeah, I mean these are ultimately team goals. I mean, he wants to be part of the winner. He doesn't want to be a guy who puts up big numbers on losing teams. He wants to help them make the Flyers a winner, whether that's this season over several seasons. We'll see. But that's he's not a guy who come in. Well, I want to score 50 goals.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that he will, but right, at least not right off the bat. But certainly all his goals tend to be focused on the team. He wants to be part of the team. Being a Flyer, I think that he has a lot of pride in that. Just in terms of this, he wants to make it his team. But I mean, as a group. But I mean, I really think that's where his ultimate ambition is to make it, to be the guy who takes the team and puts it on his back. And again, that doesn't happen overnight. But I think that it creates an excitement, and it also creates guys are going to want to be in his line.
Mm-hmm.
And it just has. I mean, again, not to compare the two, but just like when Eric Lindros was first here, because to me it's the most hyped player upon his arrival. Other guys obviously came in, like really good rookie years, really good careers, but in terms of before he even got to the NHL, you're talking about a player who made his KHL debut at age 16, in a league where that just doesn't happen, and he scored his first KHL goal in his third KHL game. That's as a 16-year-old, 2 years before he could even be drafted. Talking about one of the best leagues in the world. So, just in terms of he's used to high expectations. He has high expectations on himself, and it's going to be really fascinating to see how he adjusts to the league. He's a guy who I guarantee, because he's always done it. He'll watch a lot of film, and he will be the first guy on the ice to practice and really work his tail off, and we can see even in terms of other areas, for a guy who didn't really hit the gym till a couple of years ago, I'll tell you he's thick. I mean, he's
not
really
missing any workouts, Bill. He is thick.
Yeah. So
that's going to serve him well. Also, the thing about him that he has in common with Eric Lindros is a couple of things. Number one, when Lindros came into the league, he was this combination of the size of Lemieux, the meanness of that era, which was perfect, hands of like butter. He just such a complete player and fit the era perfectly. And Michkov comes into this NHL in 2024-25. It's a far different league. But both the players that when they came into the league, they did two things. They put butts in seats because they were in the lineup, and they put butts on the edge of seats every time they jumped over the boards. And I remember Lindros early on knew that he was going to be a target. So a lot of times in those first couple of years, especially in the first couple shifts of a game, he wasn't too worried about the puck. He would really impose himself physically on the game to say, I am not going to be pushed around. I think Michkov is going to be one of those guys that embraces that spotlight of being a very dynamic talent. And I'm just so excited to watch him as a player, game in and game out, and see this arc of a career. Like, you and I have gone through this entire arc, whether it was Simon Gagne's career covering the team, or Claude Giroux, or Jake Voracek, and those were certainly pretty damn good careers. But this is a star talent before he's even gotten to the league. Those players weren't thought of that way.
No, I said to me, Lindros is the comparison in that way.
Yeah.
Maybe
Nolan Patrick was thought of that way because he's second overall, but it obviously didn't pan out.
Right, for a lot of reasons. But even when he came in, I he's this is your franchise player right here. I mean, he was the consensus, going into the season at least, the consensus number one guy, and then. Again, he had injuries even his draft year, so he just kind of flatlined a little bit. Had it been the year before, he would have still been a top 5 pick. I mean, that's rare, but I think that the expectations for Patrick were always, okay, give it a couple years and he's going to be a first-line center. But I don't ever recall Patrick being, this guy is going to be a superstar.
If you do a redraft of any draft, Bill, he'd be a number 1 overall pick of one of the most boring guys to talk to.
Yeah, yeah.
I will tell you that. I tried so hard to crack that nut, I couldn't do it. But Michkov's arrival, big question mark going into the season. What are those success rates going to look like on the ice? I think he's going to be most comfortable right there on the ice. And if his family's around, I think that's going to help tremendously. Bill, one area where he could help leads us to our third talking point of the top 10 biggest question marks heading into the season, and it's the power play. There's no hiding from it. This power play, not just last year, the last 2 years, has been freaking hideous. It's been awful. They finished 32nd in the NHL last year, clicking at a paltry 12.2%. And in the screenshot of the email I sent you, I clipped the screenshot all the way up at number 21 because that's where the San Jose Sharks sat at 20.2%, 8 percentage points higher. So I don't want to hear about lack of talent or high-end skill because that San Jose Sharks team sucked. They were bad.
No, for sure. You know, a lot. You look at teams that even were bottom 5 of the league were about 18%.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that was a bottom end power play. I mean, there was. I mean, listen, it was the worst power play in franchise history. Before that, we had to draw a line before it became an official stat because the NHL didn't make an official stat till I think it was 77. So unofficially, by box score research, that the inaugural 67-68 season was the worst unofficially. Now you don't even have to draw that line. It was the worst power play in franchise history.
And Bill, it looked it. Yeah. This wasn't just numbers. It looked it.
It did. It was weird, though, because there were little spells where they seemed to be figuring things out, and then it would just sink again and stay that way for long periods of time. You know, and I mean, you could see what the needs are, and the needs still exist. I thought it was interesting about maybe it was about a month ago. Jake Voracek commented something on social media, on Twitter, about power plays, and he said, to him, what you really need is you have to have some sureness as to who your bumper guy is, and he can score for you, and a net front guy, particularly the bumper guy. So you can score from the slot area or from the flank. That is where a team will start to rise a little bit. He didn't say the point man. He didn't say the distributor.
Mm-hmm.
He said the
because that part's the hardest part.
Yeah,
and that's the toughest real estate on a power play is in there because the box is going to be there or diamond however they play it, but that's always going to be a collapsible position. That's always going to be a finishing position. That's the hardest element is finishing.
No, for sure. And all they have to do if you don't have that guy who can get down low and snipe one from that area for near the dots to the hash marks or inside or just inside of that is you can just overplay the point man. You can pressure the strong side if it's along the boards. You don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to worry about that guy you're going to get across the ice to that it doesn't have to be Ovechkin, but a guy who can score. You can get the puck across him, and he's a threat because you don't have to worry about it. You just dare him. Okay, get over to your bumper guy or get it to the net, which they struggle to do too, right? And we'll see if they burn us. And the Flyers haven't done that. It's been a big issue. Obviously, you need a point threat. You need a distributor. I think the Flyers have elements of some of that. Like I think Frost, for example, is a very good distributor. It's why 10 power play points is nothing special. I think it says more than 10 led the team. Yeah. But part of that was nobody could finish.
Yeah.
So
To me, you have your distributor and a guy like Frost. To me, the big element of a power play is that you have a guy on the ice that's going to demand it run through them. Yeah. Look, I run the power play. PP1 comes through me. Like when Drew was here, there was no mistake about it. No matter who was on the point, he was going to be the guy they were going to get in the zone, establish below the top of the circles, and when they got set up, it was going to be him on the left half wall.
Yes.
And that was going to be how it was, no matter what, whether it was going good or whether it wasn't going good. That's where it was going to begin. And you need to have that guy that's going to take that ownership Now, I think Michkov too young to do that. I think Frost can step into that. But, the big thing is, and it's going to lead us right to our next point, is question number 5 regarding Morgan Frost. I said this last week, Bill, and you and I have talked about it. If he's healthy for 82 games, he needs to be in the lineup for 82 games. Right. I think that Morgan Frost and the Flyers organization are at a crossroads right here, right now. I'm not saying they need to get married for 8 years, but they need to figure out if they're going to extend their relationship and keep it serious for 3 more into this free agency period. And I think that's got to take place this year. It's a huge question mark for me. When I look at Morgan, we've seen, the knockdown of the pass in the middle of the D zone, and then that sauce pass that he had to Owen Tippett behind the D. We've seen all of these flashes, and we've seen some, really good runs of consistency. The fact of the matter is that he was in and out of the lineup last year, played 71 games.
And that was all prior to January 6th. He was scratched 10 times before then, and wasn't scratched again. But listen, it came down to 1 game at the end of the season. This told me a lot, and I didn't, and I'm not. My feelings on it are very mixed, but my feeling is that it came down to game 82, and in the final 30 minutes of the game, he's on the bench. He sat for 30 minutes, which tells me that he's still not trusted by the head coach. With the whole season on the line in a 1-0 game, Ryan Paling is getting double shifted. That said to me something that where even though from January 6th until those final 10 games, and you could look at, I'm doing these off-season spotlight articles. I could pretty much cut and paste final 10 games because the whole team really just went off a cliff after the win against Boston at home.
Yeah,
they had that big comeback in Boston. They fell a little short. It was like the so-called gauntlet. And then they beat Boston, and they were just sitting pretty for the rest, to really be well set up to make the playoffs. Even 500 hockey would have done it, and everyone fell off a cliff. Frost being one of them. But it was pretty much everybody. But I think when you get into that 1-game scenario, the guys that play and the guys that sit speak a lot to who has trust. And I ultimately, it can't be a partial season for Morgan. I think that he led the Flyers, go back season before last, from I think it was December 7th or so to the end of the season. So about 2/3.
Final 2/3, yeah.
Final 2/3. He led the team in scoring over those final 2/3. The final first third, he was up and down the lineup, spent a stretch of the fourth line, was scratched in Toronto, was on PP2 a lot of the time, or sometimes no power play duty at all. Okay, it was the start. He had a 19-goal season. I think going into last year, and then he led the team in scoring in the preseason too. So okay, he's well set up for a good year. First time he was yanked was after game 2 though, and then he sat for the next 4 or 5, and that started this whole stretch where, he'll had almost right, almost set up a play, almost scored a goal, but it wasn't clicking for him, just in terms of, for a variety of reasons, in and out of the lineup. Was a healthy scratch twice against Columbus of all teams. So it was really when he had the face-to-face meeting with John Tortorella, where he advocated for himself, and they seemed to turn a corner there. That was about 40-something games, but then again the final 10, Morgan was very quiet in those final 10 or 12 games, and so he comes into this year with a lot of question marks. And to further your point about being at a crossroads, well, next year is his last year of restricted free agency.
Yeah, ARB eligible, right?
He's eligible for arbitration, and this has a situation to be where there's a considerable gap between the two sides. Particularly, if Morgan has a good year.
Yeah,
if he has a good but not a great year, then his agent Darren Ferris will come in with a much higher figure than the Flyers probably want to go in term and cap hit. I mean, the Flyers haven't actually had that many cases actually go to arbitration. I could see that. I could see a situation where they can't agree on term or on cap hit, and the
player's like, look, I'm going to stick it to you a little bit now.
Yeah. I mean, it's his opportunity to.
Yeah.
But you know, and you said it doesn't have to be an 8-year thing. Maybe it's 4 years. He's still in his 20s, and you know, and he's an unrestricted free agent. Maybe he's not a guy who they'll commit to for that long, particularly depending on how Luchenko develops. But this year, in the relatively near future, he's a key player on this team. They don't have, they don't really have centers that create a lot of offense. He's their best playmaking center and one of their two or three best playmakers. Period. But he has to make that a whole season. You know, one side of it is being put in position to succeed, but the other part of it too is actually succeeding and not
with consistency.
Consistency over pretty much a whole year. I'm not saying there's no downturns in a season, but I think Morgan needs to do that on a full season basis. And
he should not be as polarizing as a player as he is here.
No.
Shouldn't be.
Yeah. So you know, I mean, it was funny too because the knock on him going into last year was he only has good games against bad teams. Yeah. But last year he actually had much better games against playoff teams than he did against bottom teams for whatever reason. I can't explain why.
Well, that was just the 2 games against Arizona that one year where he ate. So that was the moniker because he had 8 points in those 2.
And it was the same thing with Tippett, except he ate Buffalo alive and he ate Montreal alive. I mean, a lot of those guys were, you know, when you played the better teams. And last year Tippett turned things around too against better teams as well. Yeah. You're just gonna need a level of consistency. You're not gonna always be scoring. There'll be ups and downs. There can't be so many quiet games. And as much as I like Frost, I think that is a valid criticism that Morgan sometimes has multiple games in a row where he's not creating very much, and he has to create.
Yeah. Somebody had posted last week the clip of Tippett scoring that 5th goal in the 5-1 win over Dallas. And Jim Jackson has the call, and Tippett through the neutral zone, turbocharge. And then he does the spinorama backhand bar down, just disgusting. And I was just thinking about that goal, and I'm going, that was probably the highest water point in a long time. You know, that was the 5th game of a 5-game win streak. I said we went on to lose 4 right after that, but I mean the way they played Dallas in that game, that second period in particular, I think they outshot them like 19-2, and they won the game 5-1, and it just an unbelievable night at Wells Fargo Center. That was like kind of when you start really feeling, you know, the fandom getting back into it as well. Which brings us to the last point. Last question mark we'll tackle in this episode, Bill. We've gotten to goaltending, we've gotten to Michkov, we've gotten to the power play, we've gotten to Frost. But one of the big questions going into this season is the further development of 4 guys in particular. Tyson Forster, who got to 20 goals last year as a rookie, and we mentioned in the first third of the year he couldn't chuck it in the ocean. Noah Cates, who dealt with the injury, had a good, first year in a much different role with the team, and then last year had the injury and really struggled offensively. Owen Tippett, who we just mentioned, for my money, should absolutely be a 30-goal scorer this year. If he's not, it's a huge disappointment if he's healthy. And Joel Farabee, who I know you wrote about in the Flyers Spotlight as well. Those 4 players in particular are taking the next step in the arc of their development as NHL players. I think is a huge question mark because we know that development's not a straight line. But if those players can all kind of respond, as you said before, in the affirmative, then the team is it could really end up determining the last thing we'll end up talking about, which is where they are in this rebuild.
Yeah, for sure. And to me, it's the same 2 key words: full season.
Yeah.
When
you mentioned Joel Farabee, like that's a huge mention.
Farabee was so good until the All-Star break, consistently good, and not just consistently good, but he had some really hot streaks in there too. A 7-game point streak, a 5-game point streak, another 4-game point streak, a stretch.
So I loved where he was scoring from too. He was right around the net all the time.
He was going to net, and it's why he was scoring consistently.
Yep.
And he was right at the All-Star break. He was in the NHL's top 10 and scoring the first goal of the game. Yeah. And that's, I mean, every goal is valuable, but scoring that first goal, just statistically, the team that's ahead, who scores first, leads first, tends to win most of the time.
And Bill, his were all 5-on-5. They weren't power play goals.
They were power. Yeah, that's just it, right? It was, and so I mean, so hard to score 5-on-5 theoretically, right? And scoring the first in a game too, because sometimes you're just whatever, teams relax once they have one on the board.
Yep.
You know, and he was so consistently good, and then after the All-Star break, especially from March onward, it just totally dried up, and some of it was he was moved down the lineup. His ice time was down a little bit, but some of that was also responsive to the fact that he wasn't turning around, he wasn't scoring, he wasn't getting as many chances either. He was still getting chances and struggling to finish them, but just the volume of chances he'd been getting, they just fell off to a large extent. And after you've been so consistent for the first 4 months, that to me was one of the most unpleasant developments of the latter part of the season, especially the latter 2 months. And you look at the end of the year, and he still had a career high in goals. He's had a career high 50 points, and that was all based on before the All-Star break, because it just really dried up for him. I think in the final 16 games of the season, he hit maybe 2 points. I think it was 1 goal, 1 assist.
Yeah.
I think that for Joel, doing what he did over the first 4 months, over most of the season, same thing with Forster offensively. In terms of his all-around game, I think one of the most remarkable things about his rookie year was even when he wasn't scoring, he was still pretty good in terms of forecheck, in terms of coming back on plays, digging pucks out, winning battles. So he was still doing things that keep you in a lineup, but he wasn't drafted in the first round to be a mucker and grinder.
Yeah,
and he wasn't also ever lacking for ice time. I mean, he was playing a lot of minutes.
Yeah, so, he was 17, 18 minutes, even when he wasn't scoring at all or creating a lot.
Exactly. So it's not like he's going to play more. He's not going to get more time. What he has to do is he has to take a couple of those 15, 18 game goal droughts and cut them in half, and then So I think he's always going to be a little bit of a streaky scorer. But if you cut some of those in half, and instead of no goals in 12 games, maybe you get 3 goals in 12 games.
Yeah, it's a huge difference.
And then you add that up over the course of a season, that puts you in that 20 vicinity up to around 30. And he's completely capable of it. I think he is.
I think he is too. The thing, he is one of the things that shocked me last year. I've mentioned York and his ability to defend, in particular off the rush, as being the biggest positive shock for me. The other one was that when Forster's not scoring, that he'd be still a net positive player. Yeah. He wouldn't be net negative, and he wasn't, and his usage didn't drop, so it wasn't being shielded when he wasn't scoring. So I think that is a very big element. Last thing I want to mention, Bill, it's not one of the top 10 question marks, but I've seen a couple postings. I think it was from Ronnie Attard's social media of the boys all out there kind of hanging out at, I think, Ryan Paling's place or someplace, and swimming and having cocktails and being a young man with a little bit of dough in the NHL and having a good summer before the grind of a season. And seeing Jamie Drysdale in all these pictures as well, he just seems like he has assimilated with this group incredibly well. I think a lot of that's Cam York, and the way those two, the relationship that they have. But this young group seems like, we spend time together during a season and we're together a lot and we like each other, blah, blah, blah. But in the off season, okay, I'll see you in September when we report for skates. And it hasn't been the case. These guys seem to hang out quite a bit.
Yeah,
Farabee a part of that, Tyson part of that as well. We saw them at the Phillies game with Michkov and all that.
And those guys are too. A lot of them were drafted here too.
Yeah,
but if not drafted, or came over while still young.
Yeah,
and so there's that whole kind of grow together thing. And
it reminds me kind of a Richards, Carter, Lupul, Upshot, like that. Like that group had a reputation unto its own about partying and stuff, but. Just like kind of being together and at that age.
And I mean, of course, we grew up with those '80s teams when they were the youngest team in the NHL, and
Tocchet, Zezel,
they got Derek Smith, and
Lindsey Carson,
Lindsey Carson, yeah. I mean, although and Carson was all about 25 years old, but he was one of the senior players on the team too.
Yep.
I mean, Scott Mellanby was just a kid.
Yeah.
And so they really they grew up together, in a lot of ways. And part of it was it was a good kind of competition. They pushed each other, and and they were there for one another. I mean, a lot of them had to grow up in other ways after Pelle Lindbergh died, and this is your support group.
Yeah.
And hopefully, hopefully there's nothing like that with this group or any other group, but just in terms of being there for each other on the ice, off the ice, and building friendships that last a lifetime. I mean, hopefully play together for a long, long time. But I think that kind of closeness, it's kind of enthusiasm that is infectious. Bringing some younger guys and having them start to take a bigger bite of the team. And secondly, doing it as a group,
it's a motivating factor for a player like Farabee, sure. I think, in particular.
And they want to stay around and be part of it.
Yeah.
So I think that all those things are definitely, and next week we'll go into the room and the atmosphere and the team, but but in terms of everybody feeling like even a thing like dealing with your coach, because towards coaches, everybody the same way. He's a hard coach, but they go through it together.
Yeah.
It's a lot of times people that go through military training together they have a bond.
It's a bond for life. Yeah.
Yeah. And I used to, for a number of years, some of my best friends, I took martial art of Aikido for several years, and a lot of the training sessions, they were grueling, and you were tired, and your wrists hurt from being twisted. And but they're still some of my best friends because there's just something of going through something together that I think it builds bonds.
Yeah, and for guys like Farabee, whose name has been out there, the unknown is always intriguing, but it's not always better. Yeah, and Farabee, to kind of stand him in your spotlight. He's a guy that is a baseball honk. Like, he loves the Phillies. And it's a good time to be a Phillies fan. So I think he likes where he is. So we'll see how that plays out. We'll get into the remaining top 10, 5 of the top 10 question marks heading into the 24-25 season. In the meantime, you can check out Bill's work on PhiladelphiaFlyers.com, NHL.com, and HockeyBuzz.com. We'll be back Wednesday. We'll have more development camp conversations and much more as we tick away the days of summer. Just 60 days till the Flyers drop the puck on the season against the Canucks coming up on October 11th. Everybody have a great Monday. We'll talk to you Wednesday on a brand new Flyers Daily.